lost Charlie إلى أبوكم.
Angels and Aimers, what is going on? It is the Champ Strider here, and in today's video, we're diving into best settings for Insurgency Sandstorm, and we're going to look at the settings inside the actual game, and I also, at the end of the video, will have time-stamped my Nvidia filters to play this game to make them look just a little bit better and a little easier to spot enemies. And when we talk about settings, it's always a balancing act, right? You want to get the most frames you can, you want to be able to spot enemies as easily as possible, and you also want the game to be bearable to look at. And I think I hit a really good setting set for all three of those things. And I just want to key in on the point of spotting enemies because I've watched quite a few YouTube videos and read Reddit a bit, and people always talk about frames, but I very little see people mention spotting enemies and what are the best settings to spot enemies. And I think I have a setting change that'll be kind of a game breaker for some of you guys if you haven't been using it to really make those enemies pop off of the background. And just before we hop into game, guys, if you're not yet an Angel, become one by subscribing. I release FPS content every single week, and I'm starting to do a lot of Insurgency Sandstorm content too, so you don't want to miss it. Smash that button. Let's hop in game. Alright guys, so we're over in our settings at the video tab, and as you can see, I play at 1440p. I leave my gamma on the default 2.2, and I kind of like just sticking at that 90 FOV. You know, I like to wiggle my mouse around a little bit, so I don't mind having that smaller field of view to have slightly bigger targets. I think 90 to 100 is kind of the sweet spot there, but it's personal preference. So now let's dive into the meat of things, which I know is what everyone is waiting for, and that's the graphic settings. And I want to point out this right here. The first setting, all right, the first setting is one of the biggest tips I can give anyone. And we have all these anti-aliasing options, and what anti-aliasing does is it makes the difference between two objects when they're next to each other smoother. So I like to compare it to, if you go in Photoshop, I might even throw a visual up here. If you go into Photoshop, and you have your character against the background and use that blur tool to kind of blur them together, that's what anti-aliasing does. And a high level of anti-aliasing or really good anti-aliasing, while it might look better, actually makes it harder for us to spot enemies against the background because, you know, you want those jagged edges. You don't want a smooth transfer or blurry transfer. It's like turning it off is like if you use that pen tool to just cut your object out and then just paste it back on your background. There's no blur. It stands out a lot more clearly, and players are easier to spot when you have anti-aliasing off. So if you're looking for a bit of a competitive advantage or you're having trouble seeing people, you're constantly getting shot out of nowhere, turn anti-aliasing off. It makes it so much easier to spot people. This is the biggest tip I can give people who want to get a competitive advantage in this game. I like to leave this on very high. I hate when there's those situations where you don't see objects and then you ADS in and all of a sudden there's trees and foliage blocking your view. So I like to leave this on very high. Then texture quality. This is what I found makes the game either look bad or good. Like if you turn this down to low, the game just looks like it's a PS2 game. It looks terrible. But even with all my other settings pretty low, if I leave this on high, the game looks really neat and really clean to me. And I found that texture quality doesn't really impact your FPS that much. All right, so now as we go down, effects quality, we don't want too much explosions, fire. We don't want things that block our view, so we're going to leave that on low. Same thing with foliage. We don't want super intense foliage covering everything. We want that as low as possible, that we can see enemies if they're down prone or hiding behind it. This is about seeing enemies, so we want this as low as possible. Shadow quality, I like to leave on low. The higher the shadow quality, the harder it is to see enemies who are hiding in shadows. And as we know, there's a lot of sweats out there, and people love to use those charcoal, those dark brown skins, so that they're harder to see inside of buildings. So we want to negate this as much as possible by putting it on low. Now, you could choose to switch this to medium because sometimes there are some instances that you can see someone's shadow coming through a doorway before they actually get there. But to me, it's so rare, it's not really worth doing. And then post-processing, I like to leave on medium. I found this has very little impact on your FPS in game, so I like to leave it up there. Frame smoothing should always be off unless you have an absolutely awful PC. Leave that off. Frame limiter, again, I just leave it off. Resolution scale should be on 100. If you put this higher, it will absolutely tank your FPS. The only reason to ever have this less than 100 is if you are on a real ancient video card, so just leave it at 100. Motion blur should be off. That's one of the settings that makes it harder for you to spot people. I don't know why they even put these settings in FPS games anymore, because everyone should just always have them off. Now, as we start a foliage interaction here, you're going to notice a trend that everything is either off or as low as possible. So foliage interactions off, ambient occlusion off. Filtering I have on 2x to just give you a tad better graphics. If you turn this off, the game will look a little bit worse. Tessellation I have off. Screen space reflections I have on off. You don't want to see reflections. For both shadow resolution settings, we're going to have these as low as possible. Again, shadows make it harder for us to see enemies in dark areas, so we want them low. Texture streaming off, and transition method field of view. All right, guys, so those are my graphic settings in-game. We're actually going to hop over to my Nvidia filters now, and if you have a Nvidia card, you just hit Alt-Z, and this pops up a screen that lets you change some graphic settings that make your games look a little bit better or a little bit clearer. All right, guys, so I just hopped in a bot game quick, so I'm going to show you guys my Nvidia filters to make the game look a little bit better and make it easier to spot enemies, because that's the most important thing, right? So we're going to hit Alt-Z. And we're going to have our GeForce experience pop up. We're going to hit game filter. Right now, my filters are off, and this is what it's going to be like when I turn them on. Notice there's quite a bit more contrast, and colors pop off the background a little bit better. So we're going to go to this Add Filter tab, and we're going to click Color and Brightness Contrast. For the color menu, we're going to pull the tint down to 0, tint intensity to 0, and we're going to go to this vibrance tab and up that to 60. This is what's going to make the colors pop out a little bit more and make those kind of distressed colors a little bit easier to see. You can go up to 70 if you like, but I think 60 to 70 is kind of the sweet spot on this. If you go past that, it makes the game too much like cartoony Overwatch, so I wouldn't go past 70. Then you're going to go to your brightness contrast tab, and you're going to put the contrast down to 10, highlight 0, and just leave the shadows on minus 30. Again, we're going to try to pull out some of the intensity of those shadows so it's easier to see those players with dark skins who are hiding in corners, because no one likes getting killed by those dudes, right? So we want to see them and snap on them as easy as possible, so we need to get rid of some of those shadows. And then again, your game will go from looking like this to looking like this. I hope with the YouTube quality you can see the difference there, but it does look quite a bit better. Alright guys, so that's going to be it for me. I hope the settings video was helpful and helps you guys get some more frags. Again, just before you go, like the video if you're already subscribed. If you're not, subscribe to the channel. Helps boost me up the algorithm, and you know, any views I get, any subscribers I get is always greatly appreciated. I'll see you guys in the next video. Champ out.